The sun was shining brightly over the city as the royal guard stood tall, his posture as straight as an arrow. His uniform, crisp and spotless, reflected the pride he took in his role. He had always dreamed of serving in the military, of wearing the uniform and standing in front of something greater than himself. After years of dedication, training, and sacrifice, he had earned his place as a royal guard. Before he stood in his current position, protecting the royal family and their residents, he had lived a very different life. He had once been a Navy SEAL, part of an elite force trained to handle the most difficult and dangerous situations. His time as a SEAL had taught him skills beyond what most could ever imagine, skills that had shaped him into a calm, unshakable person. Though the uniform he wore now was different, the discipline and strength he gained from his time in the military were still with him, deeply embedded in his mind and heart. Standing at attention, he gazed across the crowd that gathered around the royal palace. Tourists, locals, and curious onlookers filled the streets, all going about their day. The guard didn't mind the people around him. He was used to it. His job was to stand still, to keep watch, to maintain order. It was a job that required patience, focus, and a great deal of self-control. He had learned how to ignore distractions, to not be moved by the chaos around him. To most, it seemed like an easy task, but for the royal guard, it was a test of strength. It wasn't the job he had expected when he first joined the Navy. Back then, he had been part of a team that faced danger head-on. He had been in the heart of battles, taking part in high-risk operations that few people knew about. But after his time as a Navy SEAL, he wanted something different, something quieter, something that allowed him to use his skills for a more peaceful purpose. Becoming a royal guard had been the perfect choice for him. But even in this quieter position, the guard knew that he couldn't let his guard down. There were always challenges, and the world was full of unpredictable people. Today would be no different. As he stood in his position, a sense of calm washed over him. He had trained for this. The bustling sounds of the city, the chatter of the crowds, the clatter of footsteps. It all became background noise to him. He was in control. The guard was always ready for whatever came next. Little did he know that his calm and focused demeanor would soon be tested in ways he hadn't imagined. The next moments would reveal that not all threats were the kind you could prepare for with military training. And today, he would face something he hadn't dealt with before, something that would remind him of the real power of self-control. It was just another ordinary day for the royal guard. The sun continued to shine, and the people around him went about their business, moving through the streets, enjoying the warm weather. The guard, standing tall and steady, had seen it all before. Tourists taking pictures, children running around, and vendors calling out their goods. It was all part of the job. But today, something was different. A loud noise suddenly broke through the usual city sounds. The growl of engines, the roar of motorcycles, echoed down the street. It wasn't long before a group of bikers appeared, speeding down the road on their powerful bikes. Their presence was impossible to ignore. The group, wearing leather jackets, sunglasses, and bandanas, looked like they meant business. The sound of their engines grew louder, and the people around them scattered to make way. The bikers pulled up in front of the palace, parking their bikes in a row, their loud engines still rumbling. They were a group of rough-looking men, each one trying to outdo the other with their wild behavior. The guards in the area exchanged glances. This wasn't a regular crowd. The bikers didn't seem interested in following any rules, and their arrival caused some unease. The royal guard, however, remained unmoved. He knew how to stay calm in these kinds of situations. The bikers were just another distraction in a long line of distractions he had faced. They were noisy, but he had seen worse. His job was to keep watch, and that's exactly what he planned to do. But as the bikers dismounted, things started to get more complicated. They began to make their presence felt. They laughed loudly, teased the bystanders, and one even started revving his engine just for fun. The noise was deafening, and it felt as if they were trying to take control of the street just by being there. The Royal Guard could feel the tension rising in the air. It wasn't just the noise. The bikers had an attitude, one that was meant to intimidate. They looked at the people around them with disdain, as if daring anyone to stand up to them. And as their eyes landed on the guard, standing silently in his uniform, they saw an opportunity to have some fun. One of the bikers, a tall man with a thick beard, walked up to the guard with a smug smile on his face. He didn't speak right away, but his look said it all. He was going to test the guard's patience. With a loud laugh, the biker mocked the guard's serious expression. "Hey, what's the matter, tough guy?" the biker said, his voice loud and challenging. "You afraid of us?" The guard didn't respond. He didn't need to. His training had taught him to stay quiet and focused. But the bikers weren't satisfied with silence. They wanted a reaction, and they weren't going to stop until they got one. The tall biker stepped even closer, his shadow falling over the guard as he looked him up and down. The others in the gang started laughing, egging him on. It was clear they were trying to push the guard into a corner to see how far they could go. But the Royal Guard stood firm. He didn't move an inch. The tension in the air grew thicker. The Royal Guard stood perfectly still, his face expressionless, his posture straight. His hands rested calmly at his sides, the same way he had been trained. He knew how to handle people who tested him, how to ignore taunts and stay focused. His training as a Navy SEAL had prepared him for much tougher situations, but today these bikers were determined to push his limits. The tall biker who had spoken earlier took another step closer to the guard. He was smiling, a mischievous grin that seemed to say he had won. He raised an eyebrow, waiting for some kind of reaction. But the guard, unwavering, continued to stand tall, his eyes fixed straight ahead. It was clear the guard wasn't going to react to their childish behavior. This only seemed to egg the biker on. "What?" No response. "What kind of guard are you?" he mocked loudly. "Are you even allowed to talk, or are you just a statue?" The crowd around them started to notice the confrontation. Some people paused in their tracks, curious to see what would happen next. Others nervously glanced between the guard and the bikers, unsure if things were about to get out of hand. The biker seemed to take it as a challenge. He stepped forward again, this time putting his face closer to the guard's. The Royal Guard didn't flinch, his gaze still steady and unfazed. The biker raised his voice even louder, trying to get under the guard's skin. "Are you some kind of scared little man who just stands there? I bet you're just a puppet for the royal family," he shouted, his words echoing off the stone walls of the palace. "Tell me, tough guy, do you even know how to fight?" The Royal Guard felt the heat of the moment, but he kept his cool. His training had taught him the importance of patience and control. He knew the power of silence. Instead of answering the biker's questions, he simply looked at him with calm eyes. The biker, not getting the reaction he wanted, seemed confused. His grin faded as he realized the guard wasn't going to play along. Frustrated, the biker turned back to his friends, shaking his head. "This guy's a joke," he said to the others, still loud enough for the guard to hear. His friends laughed, but the Royal Guard remained unmoved. He wasn't there to prove anything. His job wasn't about showing off strength. It was about protecting the royal family and maintaining peace. The bikers began to circle the guard, their behavior growing bolder. One of them revved his engine loudly, trying to break the tension with noise. But still, the Royal Guard stood silently. For a moment, it seemed like nothing would happen. The bikers would continue to shout, the crowd would watch, and the guard would stand his ground, never saying a word. But the bikers weren't done yet. They hadn't expected someone like him. Someone who could stay so calm under pressure. It wasn't long before they would realize they had made a mistake, underestimating him in a way they would soon regret. The bikers were getting restless. They had tried everything to provoke the Royal Guard, but nothing was working. The guard stood there, as still and unmoving as ever, his face calm and controlled. It seemed like the more they tried to mess with him, the more he refused to react. This only made the bikers more frustrated. One of the bikers, a tall man with tattoos covering his arms, stepped up to the guard. He looked at him with an expression that was half annoyance and half curiosity. "Are you really just going to stand there all day?" the biker asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Come on, show me what you've got." The crowd around them had grown a little larger now. Some people were stopping to watch, some out of curiosity, others in fear of what might happen next. The air felt heavy, like something was about to change, but the guard didn't flinch. He had seen it all before. People trying to make trouble, people who thought they could control the situation with loud words and intimidation. He was no stranger to tough situations, and he wasn't going to let a few bikers change his focus. But the bikers weren't ready to give up. The man with the tattoos took a step closer to the guard, almost chest to chest, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're better than us, huh?" he growled. "Just because you wear a uniform doesn't mean you can ignore us. We're not afraid of you." At that moment, another biker, one with a scar across his cheek, revved his motorcycle engine again. The loud noise echoed through the street, making everyone jump. It was clear they were trying to make the guard react. But again, the guard didn't move. The biker with the scar smirked. "This guy's a joke," he muttered to his friends. "Let's see how long he can keep pretending he's tough." The bikers began to laugh, and their voices grew louder. It wasn't just the noise of their laughter that filled the air. It was the feeling of challenge. They wanted the guard to show some sign of emotion, anger, frustration, anything. But the Royal Guard stayed silent, unmoved by their taunts. This went on for a while. The bikers tried every trick they knew, mocking the guard's uniform, insulting his posture, even getting in his personal space. But nothing was working. The guard, with the calmness of a person who had faced much worse, continued to ignore them, maintaining his perfect composure. Then, one of the younger bikers, perhaps trying to prove himself to the others, suddenly lunged forward. He got right up in the guard's face, his eyes wild with excitement. "Come on," he shouted. "Do something. Fight back." The crowd held its breath. People around the palace, who had been watching quietly, looked on in suspense. Would the guard finally break his silence? Would he give in to the pressure? The Royal Guard's hands twitched slightly at his sides, but that was the only sign of movement. He could feel the tension rising, but he remained calm. His training as a Navy SEAL had taught him to remain in control, no matter the pressure. His mission, now as a Royal Guard, was to protect, not to fight unless it was absolutely necessary. And at that moment, the bikers pushed just a little too far. The guard knew something had to change. He had to make a choice, stay calm, or show them the strength they had been testing. The tension in the air was thick. The Royal Guard could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, but he didn't let that bother him. He had been in much worse situations before, and nothing the bikers did could shake him. He remained still, his expression unchanging, his body firm and strong. His military training had prepared him for moments just like this, moments where his patience and calm would be the only things that could get him through. The younger biker who had gotten in his face continued to taunt him, but the guard stayed quiet, not even acknowledging the insults. The bikers around him grew more restless. They were getting tired of trying to provoke him, but they still hadn't given up. One of them, the man with the scar on his face, took a few steps back and looked at the others. "This guy's not normal," he muttered under his breath. "We're trying to push him, and nothing's happening." The tall biker with the tattoos, the one who had started the whole ordeal, stood back for a moment. He glanced at the guard, and then at his friends, still not sure what to make of him. The silence was starting to get to them. They had never met anyone like this before, someone who wouldn't react, someone who wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a fight. They were used to getting what they wanted through intimidation, but this guard was different. It was as if he wasn't afraid of them at all, and that was beginning to make them feel uneasy. The biker with the scar spoke again, this time with a more serious tone. "All right, let's stop playing games," he said, his eyes locked onto the guard. "You think you can just stand there and do nothing? You think you're tough?" The crowd grew quiet, sensing the shift in the air. The bikers, who had been laughing and shouting only moments before, now looked unsure. The guard still said nothing. His steady, unshaken presence was like a wall. He didn't need to say anything to show his strength. The bikers were learning that lesson the hard way. Then, without warning, the biker with the tattoos stepped forward again. He tried to get in the guard's face, but this time, something was different. The guard's body language changed, just slightly. It was as if he was preparing for something. He didn't move or speak, but his posture was now rigid, like a coiled spring ready to snap. The tattooed biker, thinking the guard was finally going to respond, took another step closer. "What's the matter?" he taunted, too scared to fight. It was then that the guard made his move, not with words, but with pure, controlled action. In a split second, before the biker could react, the guard's hand shot out like lightning. He grabbed the biker's wrist with a strength that was surprising for someone who had appeared so calm. The biker's eyes widened in shock as the guard twisted his arm, pulling it behind his back in a smooth, practiced motion. The crowd gasped, and for the first time, the bikers were truly quiet. The tattooed biker struggled to break free, but the guard held him firm. The guard didn't raise his voice, didn't shout. He simply held the biker in place, letting his strength do the talking. His years of Navy SEAL training had taught him how to take control of a situation without ever needing to be aggressive. The silence hung heavy in the air as the biker finally stopped struggling, realizing he was outmatched. The guard's message was clear. He wasn't someone to mess with, no matter how many bikers stood around. The bikers slowly backed away, their faces filled with surprise and respect, realizing they had just met someone who wasn't intimidated by their threats. The biker with the tattoos stood frozen, his arms still pinned behind his back by the royal guard. The crowd around them had fallen completely silent, sensing that something big was happening. The bikers who had once surrounded the guard, laughing and shouting, now took a step back, their faces filled with disbelief. The guard had shown them something they weren't prepared for, an unmatched strength and control that made them rethink everything. The tattooed biker, who had been the loudest, now looked at the guard with wide eyes. What the hell are you?" he stammered, trying to break free but unable to move against the guard's firm grip. The royal guard didn't speak. His face remained as calm as ever, but his eyes now held a certain intensity. He slowly released the biker's arm, but the man didn't move, still in shock. The guard stood there for a moment, allowing the tension to linger. Then, with a calmness that only someone with years of experience could possess, he spoke. "I'm not just a guard," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I've been trained for far more than standing at attention." The words hung in the air. The bikers glanced at each other, confusion spreading across their faces. They had no idea what the guard meant, but the guard wasn't finished. He slowly took a step back, letting the biker stand on his own, still processing what had just happened. The crowd, who had been watching the whole ordeal, were now whispering among themselves, intrigued by what they had just witnessed. "I used to be a Navy SEAL," the guard continued, his voice still calm but firm. "I served in the military for years. My job wasn't just to stand still, it was to face danger head-on, to make tough decisions when lives were on the line." The bikers looked at him in stunned silence. The truth of the guard's words began to sink in. They had thought he was just a royal guard, a man in a fancy uniform, but now they realized he was much more. This man wasn't just standing there because he had to. He was standing there because he had chosen to, and he had the training to back it up. The biker with the scar on his face, who had been the first to taunt the guard, stepped forward cautiously. "Wait, you're telling me you were a Navy SEAL? You were in the military?" he asked, his voice more uncertain now. The Royal Guard nodded. "That's right," he replied. "I've faced much worse than a group of bikers, and I've learned how to stay calm under pressure. Because when you've been through what I've been through, you know that losing your cool is the last thing you want to do." The bikers exchanged glances, their cocky smiles fading away. They had been so sure of themselves, so confident that they could intimidate the guard into a fight. But now, they were the ones who were intimidated. The Royal Guard wasn't just a man in a uniform. He was someone who had seen real danger, someone who knew how to handle it. The atmosphere had completely changed. What had started as a loud, aggressive confrontation had turned into something else entirely. The bikers now stood, unsure of what to do next, their earlier bravado gone. The guard had shown them that not everything was as it seemed. Sometimes strength came in silence, and calmness could be more powerful than noise. The guard didn't wait for their response. He simply turned, his calm expression still in place. "Now, I suggest you leave," he said, his voice cold and direct. "Before things get any worse." The air felt heavy, charged with the tension of the moment. The bikers stood still, their faces showing a mix of shock and disbelief. They had been so sure of themselves, so certain that they could intimidate the Royal Guard into submission. But now, after hearing his calm but firm words, they began to realize just how wrong they were. The tattooed biker, who had started all of this, took a few steps back, rubbing his wrist where the guard had held him just moments before. His confidence had completely evaporated. He glanced nervously at his friends, who were all equally stunned by what had just happened. They had come here expecting a fight, maybe a good laugh, but instead they had encountered something far different. They had faced someone who had far more experience and control than they could ever have imagined. "This guy," the biker with the scar said, shaking his head. "He's not like the rest of us." His voice was quieter now, no longer filled with the cocky attitude they had once carried. The tattooed biker finally spoke again, his tone less sure, more cautious than before. "Look, we didn't know, all right," he said, his words fumbling. "We thought you were just some guard. But you're something else." The Royal Guard didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, his posture straight, watching the bikers. He wasn't going to say anything more. There was nothing left to prove. The bikers had pushed him to the edge, and now they had seen what he was capable of. His calmness, his ability to remain unfazed, had spoken louder than any words could. The bikers shuffled nervously, exchanging uneasy glances. They had never expected their little prank to go this far. They had been used to getting away with things, to testing boundaries, and having fun at the expense of others. But this time, they had crossed paths with someone who wasn't just going to let them get away with it. The man with the scar, who had been the most aggressive, took another step back, his eyes now avoiding the guard. We're leaving," he said quietly, his voice a far cry from the loud, confident tone it had held earlier. "No need to make things worse." The other bikers nodded in agreement, their earlier bravado completely gone. They had come looking for a fight, but what they had found instead was a man who didn't need to fight to win. The Royal Guard had shown them that strength wasn't always about power or aggression. Sometimes it was about knowing when to stand your ground, when to stay silent, and when to walk away from a situation that wasn't worth your time. The bikers slowly began to move toward their motorcycles, clearly eager to leave the scene. The tattooed biker gave one last glance at the guard, his expression a mixture of respect and regret. "You've got our respect," he muttered, his voice low, before turning away. The Royal Guard watched them go without saying another word. He had done his job. He had shown them that strength came in many forms. And now, with the bikers leaving quietly, the crowd around them began to murmur in approval. They had witnessed something rare, a lesson in self-control, respect, and the quiet power that came with it. As the last of the bikers disappeared down the street, the Royal Guard turned back to his post. The moment had passed. The day had returned to normal, as it always did. But for those who had watched, They would remember the calm strength of the Royal Guard for a long time. As the last of the bikers disappeared into the distance, the Royal Guard stood silently at his post, watching them go. The crowd that had gathered around them began to disperse as well, some of them shaking their heads in disbelief, others still whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed. It was a rare sight, a moment of real strength, shown without any violence, just pure control and calmness. The guard remained motionless, his back straight, and his gaze focused ahead. He had handled the situation without breaking a sweat, but it hadn't been easy. The tension in the air had been thick, and the bikers had pushed him hard. But he had stayed in control, just as he had been trained to do. For the guard, this wasn't about proving anything to the bikers or the crowd. He wasn't interested in showing off his skills or getting into a fight. His job was to protect, and he had done that by remaining calm and composed, showing the bikers that their intimidation tactics wouldn't work on him. But even as the situation had ended peacefully, the guard couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. Not because he had won, but because he had proven to himself that he could stay true to his principles, no matter the challenge. It wasn't about physical strength. It was about the strength of mind, the ability to remain calm. The day continued on, and the Royal Guard stood at his post, just as he always did. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the streets. People went about their business, enjoying the evening, but for the guard, things were different now. The earlier encounter with the bikers had left a lasting impression on him, even if he didn't show it. He had been in situations before where his patience and discipline were tested, but today had been special. The bikers had come to challenge him, to push his buttons, to make him react. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and that was their mistake. But in the end, they had learned something important. They had learned that true strength wasn't about how loud you could be or how many people you could intimidate. It was about staying calm and composed, no matter what. The guard couldn't help but think about the lesson he had taught them. It was something he had learned long ago during his time as a Navy SEAL. In the military, there was no room for rash decisions or emotional reactions. Every action had to be measured, every step calculated. It was a mindset that had stuck with him, and it had served him well. But as he stood there, the guard also knew that the lesson wasn't just for the bikers. It was for everyone who had been watching. The people who had seen the confrontation, the young boy who had asked him how he did it, and anyone else who had witnessed the way he handled the situation. The lesson was simple but powerful. Strength wasn't about physical power, it was about mental discipline. The crowd that had gathered earlier had slowly dispersed, but there was one person who hadn't left yet. It was the same young boy who had approached him earlier. This time, the boy stood a little further away, watching the guard with a quiet respect in his eyes. He hadn't said anything more after their brief conversation, but the guard could tell the boy was still thinking about it. The lesson had clearly made an impression. The guard smiled to himself. It wasn't often that he had the chance to teach someone directly. His job was to protect, to stand firm, and to ensure order, not to give speeches or try to be a teacher. But in this moment, he realized that he had done something more than just stop a confrontation. He had given the people around him something to think about, something they could carry with them. The young boy finally left, and the streets began to quiet down as the day came to an end. The guard stood there, still watching over the palace, still focused and calm. The bikers had gone, the moment had passed, but the lesson remained. It wasn't just about protecting the royal family. It was about setting an example for others to follow, showing that true strength came from within. As the evening sun set and the sky turned to shades of orange and purple, the Royal Guard continued his watch, knowing that the day's events had left a lasting impact, not just on the bikers, but on everyone who had witnessed his quiet strength. And in his heart, he knew that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply to stand your ground and stay calm, no matter what the world threw your way.